Terrific. Thanks very much, Ross. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for the slight delay to the start of this Great Manchester COVID press briefing, joined by Sir Richard Lees, and Richard will take everybody through the slides in a moment. Then I will just say something about the forthcoming integrated rail plan before we open up to all of your questions. So without further ado, Richard, over to you.
Thanks very much, Andy. And if we start with the first slide, but before I say, oops, is it arriving? Not quite arrived yet, but whilst I wait, there you go. I think first thing to say is we're still in pandemic conditions. That's fairly obvious from the numbers, but I'm going to start with what I normally end with, is that for the entire health and care system is that the pandemic is just one factor of crisis at the moment, that the whole system continues to be under intense pressure. And that's something I'll give just a little bit more detail on as we go through the slide presentation. You can see that over the last few weeks, the numbers have been coming down, still actually maintaining on average at a very high level, but coming down is better than going up. And we'll see, not in the next slide, but the one after, how that's represented through the age groups. But I suppose where we are at the moment, the trend is a relatively positive trend. If we turn to the over 60s, and again, the trend is down. In some cases, it's been a very significant fall in the numbers. I think the big issue for over 60s, it will again come up on a later slide, because it's really where we're up to with booster jabs. It's fairly clear that being double vaccinated has reduced hospital admissions, and it's certainly reduced death rates. But we have to get similar numbers of people through their boosters, and clearly a lot of people are only coming up to their 6-month limit, but we need to get similar numbers having their boosters to make sure that we can maintain the reduction of risk that we've really seen over the last few months. If we move on to the next slide, there are one or two outliers on the heat map, but you will see, as we've seen for several weeks, that in most places it is predominantly in the 0 to 15 band that we're seeing the high preponderance of cases. Let's say 0 to 15, that's largely 12 to 15, largely asymptomatic, as we've seen previously. But you do see in one or two places that there is also a fair concentration of working age, particularly the 30 to 44-year-olds, which I think does represent the extent to which that people are out socialising and living relatively normal lives. But it is still predominantly younger people, and again, that school age vaccination programme is going to be really important to get us through the winter. If we move on to the next slide, care homes, the relatively stable. We are seeing fairly low numbers of care home residents with symptoms, and similarly care home staff with symptoms, very low rates of hospitalisation, and pleased to say virtually no deaths in care homes as a result of COVID. So that remains a relatively stable position. We'll move on to the next one, which is the hospital slide. Again, weekly admissions down, inpatient diagnosis down, number of people in ICU beds down, and the number of beds occupied down, all of which is in itself good news. Reported this morning is that the average bed occupation in our hospitals is currently 93%. And we would normally consider 85% the threshold at which anything above that becomes extremely uncomfortable. So 93% is very uncomfortable indeed. And that's 93% in November, those are sort of figures that we might expect to see in January and February in a bad winter. So there is an awful lot of concern about having sufficient capacity within the acute sector as we go into the potentially most difficult part of the year. And the system's doing everything it can from beginning to end of the system, not just at one particular point, to try and free up hospital beds so that we do have capacity if we do go into a bad winter. It's not contained within these slides, but if we were to look at in primary care, GPs, pharmacies, dentists, optometry that's under stress, we see above normal levels of demand in probably about 2/3 to 3/4 of the system, and in some parts that's very much above normal demand. So a lot of stresses within there. Clearly, if people are ill, we want them to make sure that they get the care and the support that they need. But I think we do need the public to recognise that we are in unprecedented levels of demand, and we've been in that position for some time. And whilst we don't want to unduly worry people, and we are doing a lot of things to try and manage the levels of demand that we've got at the moment, it does give us some concern as we go into that winter period. We'll move to the, I think it's next slide. And this is the vaccination progress. We are talking here about first and second vaccination doses, where the overall figures are beginning to look relatively good, clearly for younger adults and particularly school children. We are still going through the vaccination progress. We're still hoping to get those numbers up, and it's getting ever more important that we do maximise the number of people, particularly at the top end of the age range, and particularly most vulnerable groups that do get vaccinated. And hopefully soon we'll start to see how many people are having their booster. It's going to be really important to get the boosters as well, because this is something everybody can do to help us manage that really very, very high levels of demand we have through the care system. I think that's it on the slides, but if that's it, I'm going to hand back to Andy.
Thanks very much, Richard. Ross, I don't know if people can see me on the screen. Am I highlighted now?
Yes, you are.
Ah, good. Thank you, Richard. So just to then say something about the publication of the Integrated Rail Plan, which we are expecting this week. Of course, we need to wait to see the detail, and it's important that we don't jump to conclusions. We haven't seen that yet. However, we are worried about what we are picking up, particularly for colleagues in Yorkshire and West and South Yorkshire and on the eastern side of the country, because there are real concerns about what is happening there. I thought it would be helpful if I just set out the Greater Manchester position, which actually is a position that is a unified position across the north, in that we believe it's very important that we ensure that we get the best possible solution for the whole of the north of England for the rest of this century and then another, because that's how significant these decisions are. At this point, we cannot downgrade our ambitions for connectivity across the north. And we've always been clear about the tests that we are setting for this new rail network. It was intended to bring the cities of the north together. That's where the northern powerhouse vision began, with much greater connectivity. And as far as we're concerned, that promise was made in 2014 by the then Chancellor George Osborne. It was then repeated in 3 separate Conservative manifestos, and there's been a significant promise made to the people of the north that needs to be honoured. So specifically, to turn to what we are looking for, it's firstly to ensure that the western leg of HS2 between Crewe and Manchester is delivered in full, with new high-speed stations at Manchester Piccadilly and Manchester Airport. And in our view, the right solution at Piccadilly is an underground through station, which Sir Richard and I have always maintained is the right option, both from a rail point of view, but also from an economic development point of view, because of the way in which a surface station would devour much needed land for development around Manchester Piccadilly, but it would also create a much better alignment and not require intrusive surface infrastructure that would come with the surface option. At the airport, we have always taken the position that if Greater Manchester is being asked to contribute to the cost of the airport, which we are, well, then other places should be asked to make a fair contribution too. But as it stands, we are the only part of the country that is being asked to make a significant contribution to the costs of HS2. And we don't see how that can possibly be right or fair when the costs are being fully met in London and the South East through the Chilterns, at Birmingham International Airport and in Birmingham. Why are we the only region being asked to contribute? So we believe, given the way HS2 has developed since the early days, the case is clear for a fully funded station at the airport, as well as the fully funded underground station at Manchester Piccadilly. Turning to Northern Powerhouse Rail, as I've said, the promise has always been a new line linking the cities of the north. It began life as HS3, people might remember, in that original Osborne speech, but then has more recently gone under the name of Northern Powerhouse Rail. But it has always been the clear understanding that this would be a new line across the north to bring that much needed capacity. And there has been a separate project being developed for the upgrade of the existing Trans-Pennine route. But they are two separate projects and have always proceeded as such. We recall the Prime Minister's commitment in Manchester shortly after taking office that a new line between Manchester and Leeds would be expedited. And we've been very clear in saying the case for that new line to go through Bradford is overwhelming, and we are united with our colleagues in West Yorkshire and across the north in saying that new line is what we were promised, it's what we need, and that new line should link the city of Bradford as well as Manchester and Leeds together. We don't know what is in the detail of the announcement, but it is important for me to say that any configuration that involves partly new line, but then upgrades later down the line, is not Northern Powerhouse Rail. That would be to rebrand and upgrade as something that it, in our view, would not be. And so that is the clear test that we will be applying to the announcement later this week. If it is not a new line, it is not Northern Powerhouse Rail, and that needs to be made explicitly clear, and that is the shared view of leaders across the north. There is a third element to Greater Manchester's tests, and that is what is called the Golden Link that goes via Wigan, connects the south of Wigan to the West Coast Main Line. Again, we believe that will bring significant benefits to that part of Greater Manchester and to Wigan particularly, and Wigan Council certainly are of the strong view that should remain in the plans. So that's our position. Obviously, we recognise the commitment that the government made in the spending review to release £1 billion, just over 5 years, for internal infrastructure improvements in Greater Manchester, and we welcomed that at the time. We have a bid in at the moment to the government's bus services improvement plan, and we are hopeful that will deliver the much needed revenue support that we need to operate that London-style internal public transport system in Greater Manchester. But the point I'm building to is that one announcement of funding alone does not level up Greater Manchester with London, nor indeed the rest of the north with London and the southeast. It has to be sustained investment, both in intra-city transport, internal transport, but also inter-city as well. It's not a case of one or the other, nor is it a case of choosing between having good north-south connectivity or good east-west connectivity. We need both. And the reality is other parts of the country are getting both. HS2 is being built in the south up to the Midlands. And as we know, a new east-west line will be opening across London and the southeast next year, the Elizabeth line, giving even enhanced east-west, north-south connectivity than the capital already has, which is significantly greater than the north. So that is where we are. Our position hasn't changed. And indeed, many of the points that we are calling for are promises that have been made to Greater Manchester over the years. We will wait to see the detail, but in many ways, building on the work of the northern newspapers today to speak with one voice for the people of the north, I believe you will see business and political leaders across different geographies and across different political parties doing the same. These decisions are fundamental to the future of the North of England economy. They are hugely significant in terms of our ability to create a more productive economy going forward and all of the benefits that comes from that. And that's why, you know, we are quite clear in saying there is no change in our position. We shouldn't see short-term decisions being made to save money when actually we then miss a massive opportunity to build the right transport solution for the north of England for centuries to come. And that's why I think we owe it to not just our residents of today, but those of tomorrow and indeed next century to hold out for what is right for the north of England at this moment in time. We've accepted second best for far too long, and that is not going to happen anymore. We expect promises made to be delivered. And on that, I'll leave it on the IRP and obviously maybe able to take questions. But I'll just say, Ross, before handing back to you, our thoughts obviously have been with our colleagues in Liverpool over the last 48 hours, and contact has been obviously made with my counterpart, Steve Rotherham, and Richard's counterpart, Joanne Anderson, and we've been providing whatever support we can. Assistant Chief Constable Russ Jackson, who leads on counter-terrorism for the North West, obviously has been playing a leading role. At this stage, there is no link to Greater Manchester with regard to the investigation, but the investigation is, of course, ongoing, and I think there's no further I can say on that at this particular moment in time. But our thoughts are with our colleagues and friends in the Liverpool city region. We have an understanding of what they are going through, but certainly I would echo the words of the Mayor of Liverpool City Council, who said that we must not allow these atrocities to divide people. We must stand together. This is about individual terrorists seeking to divide us, and we would not allow that in Greater Manchester nor in Liverpool. We will stand together as one against all forms of terrorism. And with that, Ross, I will hand back to you.
Thanks very much, Andy. If colleagues in the media know a few, this might be their first press conference, so if you do want to ask a question, please can you now use the raise hand function, which I can see Paul Kelso has already done. Jim Pickard, fantastic. So we're getting questions in now. So I'll go to Paul Kelso from Sky News, given he was first. Paul, I'm going to open your mic and enable your camera. Please say who you are, where you're from, and your question for Andy.
Yeah, hi, Mr. Burnham. Paul Kelso, Sky News here. I'm at Toton Sidings, which is supposed to have the eastern leg of HS2 running through it. That's now not going to happen. Can I just ask, if HS2 is not delivered in full and Northern Powerhouse Rail doesn't get the new line you've asked for, will that amount to a betrayal of the promises that have been made to the North and indeed the whole concept of levelling up?
So, Ross, shall I take that? I'm sure Richard may want to comment as well, given the significance of all of this to the City of Manchester. I think it's important for me to say again, Paul, that we don't yet know that it is cancelled. Obviously, there's heavy speculation out there. We don't know the fate of Northern Powerhouse Rail. But, as I said at the start, I am worried about what I have read. And actually, if what is in the papers is true, then I think levelling up would be dealt an extremely severe blow, and it's hard to see how beyond that the whole concept would be able to mean something to people. It began with a vision for the northern cities being brought closer together by modern high-speed rail connectivity. It's the case today that Manchester to Newcastle takes just under 3 hours, and you can't build a productive northern economy on that basis. And as I say, we will not allow any upgrade of lines to be rebranded as Northern Powerhouse Rail, because that is not what we were promised. The North shouldn't have to choose between, as I say, intracity versus intercity, or north-south versus east-west. We were promised it all. And, we expect the government to honour the promises that have been made repeatedly to our residents. And we've been happy to support. So I do have to reserve judgment, but it certainly is the case that levelling up will be in serious trouble if some of the reports that we have read are true. And I would ask the government to, even at this point, ensure that whatever is announced is true to the original promises that were made, not least by the Prime Minister in his first major speech in office when he came to Manchester in July 2019.
Thank you.
Richard, I don't know if you want to come in on this one as well.
Just briefly, I'm going to be perhaps wary about the language I use, but the economic analysis that we've been operating under really, and since George Osborne started talking about the Northern Powerhouse, was about the power of northern cities working together, not cities like Manchester being left on their own. So it's fairly clear that that was a very robust analysis, that if we want to maximise the economic impact of the north of England, we do need all of the northern cities to have vastly improved connectivity. So the eastern leg of High Speed 2 not going ahead would have a negative impact on Greater Manchester and the northwest. We will not get the levelling up range capacity that we've been talking about for a long time. So the economics say that the north of England needs the whole of HS2 and the whole of Northern Powerhouse Rail, and the economics say that to get maximum benefit for Manchester, we need to have the whole of HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail.
Thanks very much, Richard, and thank you, Paul. I'm going to go to Jim Pickard. Jim, you should be able to unmute yourself and enable your camera now if you just want to say who you are, where you're from.
Sure. Jim Pickard from the Financial Times. Andy, just two questions. One is that we reported last night that the plan for Leeds to Manchester is apparently to have new line from Leeds to Huddersfield, but from Huddersfield across to Leeds, that would be an upgrade. Would that be sufficient in your view? And the second question is that it's all very well criticising the government for cutting back costs on High Speed 2, but the price tag had already reached over £100 billion. Is there any price tag at which you would say, well, actually, that is too expensive, or is this a project that must be pursued at any cost?
Thanks, Jim. So to take the first question, I'll have to wait to see the detail, and I need to keep saying this. I don't want to at this stage kind of make a definitive view on things because we haven't seen what the government has put forward. But I would have concerns about what you might call a hybrid between Transpennine Upgrade and Northern Powerhouse Rail. That is what it would be. But in effect, it wouldn't be Northern Powerhouse Rail because of the fact that it is using existing lines. Bear in mind, Jim, this is already congested infrastructure. The existing rail infrastructure coming through central Manchester. It is officially designated as such. How you would build the extra capacity without severely disrupting passengers in the process is a question to be considered. But we have always taken the view that what you need is to build that additional new capacity to then free up the congestion on the existing network. And I have to say, I will be difficult to convince that you can do that via the type of option that's being considered. That has never been, in my view, the option that has been looked at. I don't know where the evidence is or the engineering work to support that configuration is. You know, if you talk about Huddersfield coming through Staley Bridge, coming into Manchester, you know, as I say, that is already heavily congested, and it's hard to see how that can be made to work. In terms of the price tag on HS2, well, we've not been managing HS2 for a decade. The government has, and I think we would say that there are things that could and should have been done over the years to manage the costs. But the point is, are we doing this or are we not? Because if you do a kind of cut price version of HS2, as Richard said before, you don't then unlock the full economic benefit. And I don't think you then justify the investment that is being made by kind of paring it back and kind of reducing the level of benefits that it will bring. The case was always made from here that it should have started in the north, and actually the north was the place where you ensured that the full benefit was maximised, given the level of connectivity in other parts of the country. It is a source of frustration to us that billions of pounds have been spent tunnelling HS2 under the Chilterns to pretty much zero economic benefit. But there is not a willingness, it would seem, and I say again, we wait to see the outcome, but there is not a willingness to spend billions of pounds in the north of England to unlock a significant economic benefit, because all of the analysis has always been that if you do improve that connectivity across the cities of the north, as Richard was saying, you would unlock a more highly productive economy, which in time would benefit UK PLC. So I'm afraid what it looks like is the same old story, that no expense is spared in London and the southeast into the Midlands, but when it gets to our part of the world, it's oh sorry, you can't have what we said. You're going to have cuts, and you're going to have a second-class option. That is the same old story that we've always had, and actually we thought we were being promised something different, levelling up. And that implies to me that the north of England comes to the front of the queue for investment, becomes the priority for investment. And I do not believe you could look at a configuration that is the one that's currently rumoured and say that reflects the north of England being the priority for investment to rebalance the country. So that's where it is at the moment, Jim. I obviously keep having to caveat it by saying we wait to see the detail. But this isn't politics. This is about something much bigger than that. It's about the prosperity of our part of the world for centuries to come. This infrastructure will be in place for a long time. And if we sell people short at this moment in time, then we are doing down many generations to come. If you look at the situation in central Manchester at the moment, we have an inadequate rail infrastructure that is trying to carry too many services, and hence people have to put up with unreliable train services right across the north. We would be making a grave mistake if we repeated that mistake and didn't learn the lessons of history and allowed suboptimal infrastructure to be built, saddling the north of England in perpetuity with a suboptimal rail system. It's not something we're prepared to do.
Thanks, Andy. Richard, did you want to come in on this one?
Can I just add one thing, and it is that question on the cost of HS2. Might imagine that if the Eastern leg is cancelled, then that's just takes costs out completely. What it says is that there is a level of annual subsidy that goes into the north of England because our economy is underperforming, that will just continue in perpetuity. This is a choice about what we spend money on. Do we spend money on investment to allow the north of England to be more self-sufficient, or do we continue to spend it on subsidising low productivity and lack of achievement? That's the choice. I know what my choice would be. It is to invest in the north to allow us to become more self-sufficient.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you, Jim. I'm going to go to Helena. You should be able to enable your mic and put your camera on now if you just want to say who you are and where you're from.
Hi, thanks, Ross. It's Helena from the Manchester Evening News. A couple of questions from me around health. We've been doing a lot of stories in recent weeks based on the experiences of patients and staff with the ambulance service. We've had pictures of ambulances queuing outside of hospitals while paramedics tell us they can't drop anyone off. And we had one mother who died after waiting almost an hour for an ambulance while she was in cardiac arrest. What are the average turnaround times for ambulances right now? What is being done to bring them down, and might we see something like the army being brought in, as we've seen happen in Wales? Is that something that you want? Secondly, we've been told by A&E consultants that, much like yourself, Sir Richard, that they're very uncomfortable with the sheer volume of patients who are spilling out into corridors at the moment. There seems to be unprecedented demand with patients, so they're not going to stop coming in. What exactly is being done to bring down that overcrowding so patients can be being treated safely?
Okay, I think it's also the case, to add to that, Helena, that of people turning up to A&E, whether it's in an ambulance or under their own steam, there are also very high levels of acuity as well. These are people who ought to be going to, a lot of them are people who are going to A&E. There is a large amount being done, although clearly the fact there is unprecedented pressure does put a limit on what can be done. But what is being done is to try and improve the entirety of the patient flow. So that's starting from either self-referral or the call for an ambulance, all the way through to discharge from hospitals, to try and make sure that we do increase capacity all the way through the system. Because if you have a blockage anywhere there, then it builds up. So it's not that NWAS aren't doing their job, or it's not that A&E aren't doing their job. It's not that other people, that if people are admitted aren't doing their job. It's we are just not getting that patient flow. The sort of things we're trying to do, it is, for example, at the front door, as well as having staff you would expect in A&E. It's about having GP services there. It's about having mental health services there. It's about improving triage, so that if there are other ways of people getting treatment, that we take those out of those. It is about trying to accelerate discharge from hospital of those people who are medically fit for discharge. All of those things are being worked on at the moment, so that we can try and reduce those pressures. And I have to say, we do really have quite serious concerns going into the winter that we need to be able to do that. What you can't expect is suddenly for a health and care system that's already operating at full pressure, what they can't do is suddenly add an extra 10% capacity. That's just not doable. We've got to find ways of managing the capacity we've got, and that's what everybody throughout the system is doing, and they are working together as well. They're not doing it individually. The ambulance service are working with the acute sector, and they're working with primary health and care to make sure that we can try and manage this in the optimum way. And again, within the acute sector, we are still doing the mutual aid that we've been doing over the last couple of years, so that not many of them, but if a hospital is in slightly less pressure, a hospital is under a lot of pressure, that we can use one to relieve the pressure of the other.
Thanks very much, Richard. Thank you, Helena. I'm going to go to Michael Gaffney. Michael, you you should be able to open your mic and turn on your camera now.
Hi, am I coming through?
Yes.
Brilliant. Hi, Michael Gaffney, LBC. Thanks for the time. Just coming back to the situation over the last few days in Liverpool and now the national terror threat level being upgraded. I was just wondering if there's a message to people in Greater Manchester about vigilance, but also, you know, just resilience and looking out for each other, because it will have revived some, you know, worrying memories for people.
It will, Michael, and I, hinted at that at the start. Of course, it will have brought back painful memories for people here. Obviously, a different incident, not on the same scale, but nevertheless, it does have a very destabilising effect on people, and particularly for those who were directly affected by the attack at the Manchester Arena. And I know it brings back painful memories. Any attack does. We had the anniversary of the Bataclan at the weekend, and all of this, brings real distress to people. And we think about obviously everybody affected by the Manchester Arena all of the time. Yes, to answer your question, to remain vigilant. I think people will have seen the raising of the threat level. So I would certainly ask all Greater Manchester residents to take note of that. Obviously, people have been out and about and enjoying things post the lifting of restrictions, but I think it's a reminder to everybody that this threat has not gone away by any means, and people need to take appropriate action should they see something suspicious. And it is a reminder, a grim reminder, but a reminder nonetheless that is what we are asking all people to do. We're grateful to ACC Russ Jackson for the support he's provided to colleagues in Liverpool. As I say, we've been in touch with them. Obviously there's been a very fast-moving investigation, and I guess people should take some reassurance from that the authorities have moved extremely quickly. And we will be doing everything we can to support colleagues there over the hours and days that follow. At this stage, as I said at the start, there is no evidence that there is a link to Greater Manchester. So that obviously is something that is relevant when people are considering this incident. But it's still early days, and I'm not going to say today that it won't move further afield. What we will ensure is there will be the fullest possible investigation, and obviously the experience of our officers here no doubt will be of support to colleagues in Merseyside as we ensure that all those that had any responsibility for this appalling attack are brought to justice.
Thanks, Richard. Would you like to come in?
No, I think Andy's covered it. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Richard. If colleagues in the media have any more questions, if they could raise their hands now. At the moment, we don't have anybody else indicating. Just had one more person there. If there's any other colleagues, we do have unusually a little bit of time. So if anybody does have a question, please do raise your hand now. I'm going to go to Jen. Jen, if you can, you should be able to unmute your mic, put your camera on now. If you just say who you are and where you're from.
Hi, it's Jen Williams from the MEN. I just wanted to come back to something Helena asked Richard about the hospitals. Are we in a position where we need to be thinking about requesting military support for MWAS? Just given that that's something that devolved administrations, that's a road that they've gone down. And on care, you talked a bit about discharge. From what we're hearing, talking to people in the system, a huge part of the pressure is coming from a lack of capacity and resource in care homes. And I just wondered how worried you are about the winter and what impact that could have on that patient flow that you talked about before.
Well, the first question is a lot more complicated than it might seem. That certain, if you have unqualified people picking up more people faster, taking them to a front door that they can't get through, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. So what I think I described of trying to solve the whole patient pathway is really crucial in this. And if we just look at one little bit of it, we're not going to solve or we're not going to improve on that problem. So actually, from a conversation I've had with the chair of NWAS, that if you compare NWAS with other ambulance services, it's actually one of the better performing ones. So this is not a localized problem. This is a national problem. And I think we need to see it within that context. In terms of discharge from hospital, something like probably 65–70% of the patients currently in hospital awaiting discharge are, I think they're described in the terminology as no reason to reside, i.e. they are not waiting for care packages. That there's a whole range of reasons why they're quite often unwilling to leave hospitals. Quite often older people feeling a lot safer where they are at the moment. A range of reasons which we are kind of working through, but it's a relatively small issue to do with the availability of care packages at the moment. I say something like 65–70% are people who could just go home, but it's persuading them to go home.
Thanks very much. Unless there's any more colleagues in the media who had a question, or unless Andy, you wanted to come in on that question, I think we're, if you had any final comments, Richard and Andy, then we can finish.
There was one from my point of view, Ross, and it was something that really I've perhaps not got over today, and it's that colleagues on the eastern side of the country will be much more impacted if the reports are true, and we would want to recognise from here that obviously they will have much more cause to be concerned about what is happening at the moment. Obviously, it would seem that Manchester and the western side of the country may not be as affected, but obviously we still wait to see the detail. But we certainly would want to get over that we stand together with colleagues on the eastern side of the country. As Richard was saying, in the end, all of this has to come together as one whole, and lift all northern cities and towns and suburbs and rural areas together. We need the whole of this network rather than chopping bits here and downgrading bits there. That isn't going to create a 21st century rail network for the north of England, and it can't be done on a patch and mend sort of basis or just lopping bits off. There was a logic to what was created with the two legs, the western leg, the eastern leg, and then the connecting infrastructure of Northern Powerhouse Rail. It was a logical construct, and what appears to be happening in the bid to save money is just pieces are being taken out of it, and the more that you do that, the less sense it makes, and the less it kind of creates that single unified system of connectivity that means that all places are lifted together, and that's why we will be obviously very much wanting our colleagues in Yorkshire to take the lead, given that they will potentially be the most affected, but we will be standing in support. And I think from what I'm picking up, the feeling across the north is unanimous, across geographies, across political parties, across political leaders and business leaders, across all walks of life, actually. So that's where we find ourselves today, and we hope there's still time for the government to listen and to change plans, or at least to offer us some form of discussion whereby we can influence these things rather than have a substandard plan imposed upon us, which would be a really, really poor outcome given the raising of everyone's ambitions by the original Northern Powerhouse speech 7 years ago. So that's where we find ourselves today, Ross. I just thought it was important for me to say that we don't want to, in highlighting our issues on the western side of the country, I don't want to give the impression that they are kind of bigger than the potential changes we might see to the to the rail investment on the eastern side of the country is potentially more significant and serious there, and we stand in support of our colleagues there, whilst also recognising that we aren't here getting what we need either. So it's not a great place. Maybe the integrated rail plan will surprise us. Let's hope so. But with that, Ross, I think I'll finish, and unless Richard wants to say anything, no, I think we'll probably call it a day there, and thank everybody for their attendance and for their questions. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Andy.